Should be working out. Our names are Mallory Little and Amelia Strickland, and today we're going to be given a brief overview of the assessment called the Battelle Developmental Inventory, the second edition.
Okay, so as a general overview, the Battelle Developmental Inventory is a standardized, individually administered assessment battery of key developmental milestone skills in children, and the children that are assessed using this battery are from birth to age 7, and it basically just looks at developmental milestones. The test yields information regarding raw scores, standard deviations, cut scores, age equivalents, and also pass-refer criteria. The procedures are designed to collect data through a structured test format for assessment of children, and interviews with parents, teachers, and caregivers are used, as well as observations in the child's natural settings. And a 3-point objective scoring system is used as a sensitive measure, which takes into account emerging skills as well as fully developed skills.
So the 5 different areas of development that are assessed in the BDI-2, they call them domains, but it includes adaptive, personal, social, communication, motor, and cognitive development. And we're going to talk a little bit more about each of those areas in a little bit.
Okay, so administration of the test, the starting point information is based off the child's chronological age, and it's important to never begin with an item higher in difficulty than the starting point for the child. For all subdomains, the basal level is reached when the child scores 2 on 3 consecutive items, and also for all subdomains, the ceiling level is reached when the child scores 0 on 3 consecutive items. For the structured type of procedure, the examiner obtains information in a controlled setting and then incorporates materials or stimuli to elicit a response from the child. And during the observation portion, it is used to evaluate skills that a child would probably not display during a test session and that cannot be easily assessed by using the structured procedure. This procedure should only be used when the examiner has extended contact time with the child and also when it's in a natural setting. For items that use this procedure, the parent, caregiver, and teacher are asked to report on behaviors that the examiner could not easily or naturally elicit in a structured situation. Simple yes-no responses from the parent or caregiver are not sufficient to assess the child's performance.
So for scoring, like Amelia said earlier, the BDI-2 uses a 3-point scoring system. A score of 2 on a test means that the child performed the skill and shows mastery of the skill. A score of 1 means that they might have attempted the skill or the skill is emerging, but the skill has not been mastered yet. And a score of 0 means that the child either didn't attempt the skill or that their attempt was completely unrelated to the task. So that would be the score of 0. After all of the items are scored, you calculate your raw score for each domain and each subdomain. So those raw scores can be converted into standard scores. When you can use the standard scores to look at different charts provided in the manual to find the child's age equivalent, percentile ranks, and confidence intervals. And after finding the standard scores for each subdomain and domain, you can also calculate their total BDI-2 developmental quotient score, which is basically a standard score for the child's general overall development.
Okay, so the first domain that we're going to talk about is the adaptive domain. And this domain measures the ability to use information and skills acquired in other domains, and it's divided into 2 subdomains, which are self-care and personal responsibility. The self-care subdomain consists of 35 items that assess a child's ability to perform the tasks associated with daily routines with increasing independence shown by the child. And examples of items in this subdomain include eating, dressing, toileting, grooming, and preparing for sleep. The personal responsibility subdomain is made up of 25 items that assess the child's ability to assume responsibility for performing simple chores such as putting away toys, making phone calls, or making up a bed.
So the personal social domain looks at the child's social skills and their social interactions with adults as well as peers. And there's 100 items that are assessed in this domain. It's divided into 3 subdomains, which are adult interaction, peer interaction, and self-concept and social role. So skills evaluated, or examples of skills evaluated in this domain are cooperating in group activities, greeting familiar adults spontaneously, or stating his or her first and last names.
Next is the communication domain, and this domain measures how effectively a child receives and expresses information and ideas through verbal and nonverbal means. This domain is made up of 85 items, and it is divided into 2 subdomains, which are receptive communication and expressive communication. Receptive communication is made up of 40 items, and it assesses a child's ability to discriminate, recognize, and understand sounds and words, as well as other information that's received through gestures or other nonverbal means. Sample milestones for this subdomain include responding to different tones of voice and also answering who or what questions, and identifying initial sounds in words and associating pictures with words. And the expressive communication subdomain is 45 items, and it assesses the child's production and use of sounds, words, or gestures to relate information to others. And it also assesses the child's ability to use simple rules of grammar.
The motor domain portion evaluates the child's fine and gross motor skills. It includes 100 items. The 3 subdomains include gross motor, fine motor, and perceptual motor. So examples of the skills evaluated in this section include stacking 8 cubes vertically, drawing a person with 6 parts, and skipping on alternating feet for a distance of 20 feet.
The cognitive domain measures the skills and abilities that are most commonly thought of as mental or intellectual, and the cognitive milestones include activities such as attending to, perceiving, and processing information. And it is made up of 105 items, and it's divided into 3 subdomains, which are attention and memory, reasoning and academic skills, and perception and concepts. Attention and memory is the 30-item subdomain, and it assesses the child's ability to visually and auditorily attend to environmental stimuli. And this is done at varying lengths of time. And also the sample milestones for this include reciting poems, stories, or songs from memory, and also locating hidden items in a complex picture. Reasoning and academic skills is a 35-item subdomain, and it assesses critical thinking skills that a child may need to perceive or solve problems. And this includes things such as matching colors, demonstrating skills in math such as addition or subtraction. And the perception and concepts is a 40-item subdomain, and it assesses an infant's active sensory motor interactions with immediate environment. So examples would be comparing objects based on physical features and relating objects and events based on a specific time or place.
The examiner's manual also includes a good bit of information about test reliability and validity. A test reliability refers to how consistent test scores are across different times, environments, and testing circumstances. So when looking at the reliability of the BDI-2, we can look at its internal consistency reliability, its test-retest stability, and its inter-score agreement. And the manual provides information about all 3 of these areas. So the reliability coefficients for all subdomain groups were at or above 0.85, but ranged from 0.85 to 0.95. reliability coefficients for the domain DQ scores were at or above 0.90, ranging from 0.90 to 0.96, and the total DQ's average reliability was 0.99. The BDI2's internal consistency reliability was high because of those high reliability coefficients. To look at test-retest stability, the researchers looked at 252 examinees who were tested 2 different times by the same examiner. They separated examinees into 2 different age groups, a 2-year-old group and a 4-year-old group. So for the 2-year-old group, the test-retest correlations from domain DQ scores were between 0.87 and 0.90 with a median of 0.89, and the stability coefficient for the total DQ was 0.93. For the 4-year-old group, test-retest correlations from domain DQ scores were between 0.87 and 0.82 with a median of 90, and the stability coefficient for the total DQ score was 0.94, which shows that the BDI2 has high test-retest stability. And the last way to look at a test reliability is interscore agreement. This means basically that if the same child is tested by several different examiners, then their score would remain consistent. So the percentage of agreement between I think they had 3 different examiners, so the percentage of agreement ranged from 94 to 99%, and the correlation ranges from 0.97 to 0.99, which suggests a high level of inter-rater reliability.
Okay, so validity is just how sure you can be that the interpretations and recommendations based on test scores are accurate and supported by the theory and evidence. Content validity, this includes professional judgment, the coverage of important constructs, and empirical item analysis. Information describing how each of these things contributes to the validity of the BDI2 can be found in the manual. Criterion-related evidence of validity compares the BDI2 to other similar tests, including the Bailey scales of infant development and the preschool language scale, and several others. This section also describes research outcomes for use of the BDI2 with special groups including autism, cognitive delays, developmental delays, motor delays, prematurity, and speech and language delays. Construct-related evidence of validity describes the evidence that scoring truly measures what constructs are intended to be measured. To illustrate this validity, the manual describes research dealing with age trends, the intercorrelations of subdomain, domain, and total scores, as well as exploratory and conformatory factor analysis. Overall, there is strong evidence of reliability and validity within the BDI2.
So we'd like to demonstrate one item from each domain. So I'm going to start out with the adaptive domain. The subdomain for this item is self-care, and the behavior that we would be testing for would be that the child is able to remove his or her shoes without assistance. So the procedure for this item, I'll give you an example of the structured procedure. So if the child is wearing shoes with tie straps or fasteners, I would tell the child, show me how you get your shoes off your feet. And I would observe the child's behavior after I gave that prompt to see how well he or she would be able to get the shoes off of his feet. There's also an interview portion of this item where you could ask the parent or caregiver certain questions, like how does the child remove these shoes? Does the child untie or unfasten the shoes rather than prying or kicking them off? And does the child need assistance when removing his or her shoes? So that was a structured and interview procedure for that item, and that was the adaptive domain. So the next domain would be the personal social domain. The subdomain of this item is self-concept and social rule. So the behavior that we would be testing for this item is for the child to state his or her first and last names. The procedure for this is structured. So as an examiner, I would say, what is your whole name, your first and last name? And I would wait for the child to respond to evaluate his response. If he doesn't respond, I would say, is your name blank, and say a name that is different from the child's name. Or I would say, is your name, and actually say the child's name and see how well they respond. And then I would score their response based on how accurate it was. So that was the personal social domain. The third domain, and the third example I'll give, is the communication domain. For this item, the subdomain is expressive communication. And the behavior we would be looking for is if the child can produce one or more single-syllable consonant vowel sounds. For this, the procedure is mainly observation. We would listen to the child's vocalizations to see if he or she produces one-syllable consonant vowel sounds like da, ba, ka, ma, or gu. An interview might be necessary. So you would ask the parent or caregiver certain questions such as, does your child regularly produce one-syllable consonant vowel sounds such as ba, da, ka, ma, or gu? And if so, ask the parent to provide demonstrations of the type of sounds that the child makes, and also ask how often the child is able to produce those sounds. So that was the communication domain.
Okay, so the next one is the motor domain, and the subdomain for this one is gross. And what we're going to be doing during this domain is we would place the child in a sitting position on the floor, and we would ask the child to stand up and come toward the examiner. And we also might do an interview portion of this domain where we would ask the parent or the caregiver if the child moves from a sitting position to a standing position, and if so, how does the child perform the action, and also we might want to know what kind of support does he or she need. And then the next domain and the last domain is the cognitive domain, and the subdomain for this domain is attention and memory. And for this procedure, we would place 3 colored chips on the table that would be in a horizontal row in front of the child, and it would also be from the child's left to right, and the chips would be red, green, and blue. And then we would point to each color in the row and say to the child to look at the colors, and also tell the child that each one has its own name. And then we would point to the red chip and we would say, or ask the child, what color is this? Or what is the name of this color, or what do we call this color? And after the child responds, we would repeat the procedure for each of the other colors in the following order, which would be green and blue.
Okay, is this me? Yeah. So our general impression of the BDI-2, we thought that it took some time to become acquainted with, and part of that was because the manual seemed confusing to us at times. We liked that the BDI-2 assessed 5 areas of development because we thought that it would give a clinician a good general picture of a child's skills. The scoring system is pretty similar to other tests that we've given and or studied, so that part was pretty simple to learn. But the 3 different testing methods confused us. It was unclear to us whether you use them all together or choose one method of testing. We eventually came to the conclusion that it depends on the child, and sometimes more than one method of testing may be necessary. And one thing that our research about this test taught us is that some clinicians have trouble keeping material straight during testing while also scoring and keeping the client on task. So we read that some clinicians recommend having a minimum of 2 examiners so that manipulating test objects and keeping the child on task isn't the responsibility of one person. So that would be something to think about.
So with every test, there are pros and cons. A con that we saw is that it could be difficult to administer with only one clinician. As Mallory said, it's recommended that 2 clinicians help administer the test. And also, we noticed that the test was rather expensive, so that could also be a con if your school system has some type of budget that they have you on. Also, the pros, it was useful if IFSP and IEP planning is necessary, useful for monitoring child's progress, and it also provides a general overview of the child's strengths and weaknesses. And if you're unable to administer certain test items, you can use interviews as a supplement.
And that is our general impression of the Battelle Developmental Inventory 2nd edition.